Hi, and welcome to episode 79 of the Give Me a Crown Knitting, Spinning and Bits and Pieces podcast. Today is Wednesday, the 21st of February 2018, and my name's Nina, also known as Give Me a Crown on Ravelry, Instagram, Pinterest, and it's the name of my Etsy shop. I'm coming to you from a little village in the central west of New South Wales in Australia, and it's lovely to have your company. It's been a few weeks since my last podcast, but I have been off to Sydney for a few days, so I've got quite a few acquisitions to share with you later on this episode, and lots of stories to tell. I am slightly suffering still from my visit to Sydney. My sinuses didn't seem to agree with the air in Sydney, so excuse any snuffling, but let's get on with the show. We have a spin-along starting on the 1st of March, which will be running until the 30th of April. It's just a bit of a casual spin along, no special name or theme, and the only requirement is to spin up at least 50 grams of fibre. You can do that however you want, so whether you spin one full braid and count that as 2 entries, or whether you spin up 5 10-gram minis, then that counts as 1 entry. I'm happy for you to sort of play around with what you've got and see what you come up with, whether you're experimenting or spinning for a project. I'll set up a thread in the Give Me a Crown Ravelry group with all the sort of details for it, but it is very casual, so if you want to take part, I highly recommend it. It will definitely get me back into spinning because I haven't been doing any spinning for a while. For a prize, we have a donated skein, a donated braid from Skein in the Morning Sky colourway, and it's an 80% merino, 20% nylon blend, and I think that will make up for some amazing sock yarn or whatever you choose to do with it. So pop over to the Ravelry group and get started on the 1st of March if you want to take part. I have one finished object. I was hoping for 2, but I've only got 1, and it's this little girl, and this girl's name is Winnie. I put out a call on Instagram asking for names, and one suggestion was Winnie, which is short for Winifred, meaning peace. And she's going to be coming along driving with me, so she's going to sit in my car and keep me company on my travels. And I think that it's an absolutely perfect little addition to my car. I'm going to be making a few other little things to pop in the car just to make it mine, and I think she's wonderful. So this was the Voodoo You Love Me pattern by Susan Claudino. It's a paid pattern on Ravelry, and I knit it with Dragon Horde yarn, fluffy sock in the Trelawney colourway. I've used a fingering weight yarn, whereas the pattern I think is generally knit up in heavier weight yarns, and I only had 2mm needles, so it's a little bit of a loose gauge. You can't quite see the stuffing popping out, but I did overstuff it because I know that these things tend to sort of compress a little bit with time. I would have preferred to go down to a 1.5mm needle, and I managed to pick some up when I was in Sydney, so I have another one of these on the go. I think it's adorable, a little bit quirky, and I put a picture up on Instagram of it, and my sister-in-law showed my nieces, and so I've got a couple of requests to make more of these. So this is the next one, and it's coming up with a denser fabric on the 1.5mm Karbonz needles, and this is with some Renan Ollie sock yarn, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that comes up. I only started this last night, so I'll be working on that over the next little while. And then I'm going to make another one with the same yarn, and I will see what difference there is in size. I'm guessing it'll just be a little bit smaller, but hopefully not too much, because the neck on this little girl is very, very floppy. Whee! So I think I might make a little bit of an adjustment because I'm using the even smaller needles, just to have a few more stitches in the neck so that it doesn't completely and utterly fall off, because it's very hard to get a bit of stuffing into that tiny area. but I'll see how I go. Apart from that, I don't think I'm going to make any changes at all. So this only used up 11 grams of yarn, and I think it's a fantastic use of minis. For instance, if you've got sort of even a 10 gram mini and then putting a different colour in somewhere, you could do a stripy one or what have you, but so happy with my little Winnie. I also have some socks on the go that I was working on when I went to Sydney. These are the Gladys Socks, and it's currently on some stitch holders because I needed the 2.25mm HiyaHiya sharp circular on my other project that I'm working on at the moment, but I sort of didn't get too far. I think I was up to about there. Just the way that my travelling happened, the coach from here left at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I just wasn't quite feeling the knitting vibe on the whole journey to Sydney. And then I did a bit of knitting while I was in Sydney, and then on the way home I was feeling a little bit pooped, so didn't get as much done as I'd hoped, because these are meant to be for my mum for her birthday, which was last week. So I got her another present, so that's okay. But that's the first of the socks, and hopefully I'll have these done in the next week or so, because from memory it didn't take too long at all to do these. So these were part of the Christmas Eve cast on that Little Bobbins Knits has every year. My final work in progress is the big one that's taken up most of my knitting time, and this is how it's looking at the moment, and there's no needles attached, but there's one more bit of knitting to do. So this is the Bransfield Vest by Isolde Teague, and this is how it's looking. So I've cut my steeks, can you believe it? And I have these armbands in place, and I just need to do the neckband, and then it will be ready for a wash and a block, and that will bring out the pattern a lot more clearer than what it is at the moment. So it's looking very wrinkly. This is knit from Adagio Mills Alpaca 4-ply yarn, and yeah, it definitely looks wrinkly, but it will smooth out with a wash. The Bransfield pattern is the first colourwork pattern that, like, all over colourwork pattern that I've ever knit, and it's for the 2018 Year of the Sweater sort of casual knit along that's going on, and it's my first one for that, so getting it done by the end of February would mean that I've done 1 out of my 6 sweaters that I'm planning to do. I was looking back because there was another Instagram hashtag of my first sweater, and my first sweater was only just over 3 years ago, so I think it's not too bad that I've actually managed to get to the point of knitting all over colourwork after just 3 years. Pretty proud of myself. So it's a great pattern. In combination with the links that are in the Ravelry pattern, I haven't had any major issues apart from the steeking. The steeking has caused me a lot of concern and worry, and I think part of that is that I'm using alpaca yarn, which doesn't have the grip that a woolly yarn would have. So I'm not at all convinced that the steeks that I've got in place here will hold on. I've got some yarn tails poking out in various places, so I don't know if you can see, but there's some sort of yarn tails around there, and I think I'm going to have to figure out how to sew a ribbon on the inside just to tack that into place, and hopefully I don't end up with any popped stitches. I'm truly expecting, when I wash this, for some disasters to occur, but if they do, I will fix them, and it's all part of the learning process. But I kind of wish that I had done my first steeking on something woolly, but then I don't think that would have necessarily helped me to figure out how to do this one better. But if you're going to start steeking, woolly might be the way to go rather than alpaca. When I was knitting this body, I was carrying all 5 yarns up as I was going along, because there's actually 5 colours in there, even though it might not look that way. I'm glad I did that. It didn't mention that in the pattern, but I then split, or I cut each of the yarns as I was doing the top part. It's still knit in the round, but I didn't want to have a bulky sort of carrying up of yarn along one of the arm edges, so I decided to cut my yarns and weave in the ends, and I ended up with about 70 yarn tails to weave in, just from sort of from the armpit up, along with a few from down the bottom. And I've still obviously got a few in here, as you can see, that I'm waiting to do the neckband, and then I'll weave them in. So there'll probably be about 90 yarn tails to have done, and if I'd have cut the yarn along the whole of the body, it probably would have been about 150 yarn tails. So I'm glad that I did the carrying up of the yarn. I'll just show you how it looks. So on the inside, that's where I've been carrying up my yarn. I just twist them together as I go. And it's the same technique that I used on this top, actually, so it doesn't create too much bulk, and on something that's this heavy anyway, I don't think it's not going to matter. If it was a really bulky yarn, I probably wouldn't do that, because then the combination of lots of bulky yarns together would probably create a fairly noticeable lump in the side. But yeah, so that's the inside with my floats. They look tight at the moment, but just based on my swatching and knowing how this yarn behaves, it will even out. I keep apologising for my knitting, which I probably shouldn't need to do, but I do want people to know that it's going to look great once the yarn has been washed and relaxed. So by next episode, I expect this one will be finished, and then I will have an amazing vest, and it's going to be super, super warm and perfect for winter and probably autumn and spring as well, because it gets pretty cold out here. It was 9 degrees Celsius, I think, overnight, and that's why I've got my jumper on, even though it's still summertime. Before I went to Sydney, I was sent some yarns by Finch yarns. So these are 2, which are on the Good Sock base, which is a 75% superwash wool and 25% nylon. It looks like a really, really good base for knitting socks, but I think it would also work well for shawls, and that's what I'm leaning towards at the moment with these 2. I think that they'd make a wonderful pairing for a shawl. And this is the Grim Speckle colourway and Starry Night, but I'm not sure if they're repeatable colourways. I think these ones might be one of a kinds. They also sent me these 2. These are 100% superfine merino, and this one is in the Lofty colourway, and then this one's in a colourway that I can't pronounce, but I think again that these are one of a kinds, so probably not repeatable, but they will have similar kinds of yarns in their Etsy shop. I'm a bit torn about what to cast on first. I think both of these would make wonderful combinations for shawls, but I'm still pondering. I think this one might be the first one that gets cast on, and then whether these become mittens or hats or all sorts of possibilities. So thank you very much, Finch Yarns, for sending me those. I then have a few acquisitions from Sydney. So on Thursday, when I got to Sydney, I popped by the Happen store, and it's retail, workshops and gallery. It says the Happen store is a multifaceted creative space for genuine like-minded people, makers and yearners. A place to come to make, to learn and become inspired. An authentic and unique destination to celebrate artistry and friendships. And it's a beautiful space. It's a sort of space that I wish had been in Sydney when I was living there. Lots of there's table space, and they have the workshops and things, and there's a selection of yarn there. It's a very curated selection of yarn, and there's some indie dyers, and there are magazines, there's needles, and the choices are absolutely beautiful. At that stage I was thinking that the only reason that I was visiting yarn shops in Sydney was to pick up some needles. So I picked up some, and this is where I'm going to fail miserably, Lykke driftwood needles. So this is a fixed circular. It's the 2.25mm US size 1 in the 32 inch. I didn't actually expect to be able to find the Lykke needles in Sydney, so I was pleasantly surprised. Great price point as well. And my idea was to pick up some double point needles in Sydney, but they didn't sell these in singulars. Not sure if they're available anywhere as singulars. They had them in a set, but not in the singulars. So I decided to pick up this because I can use it for sock knitting and just try out what the driftwood feels like. A lot of people have said very good things about the needles, so I'm looking forward to trying those. And then I got swayed by this yarn. So this is from Yama yarn from South Africa, and this is the Rusty Bicycle colourway, and it's a 100% merino singles, 360 meters or 394 yards per 100 grams. And I mean, those colours are just amazing. So there's some browns in there, purples and blues, and absolutely gorgeous. So just the amount of brown in there definitely had me, and it's been a while since I've played with singles yarn, so not entirely sure yet what I'm going to make with it. Possibly a shawl, but it could also turn into a hat. I love singles yarn for hats, so absolutely just amazing. So I really enjoyed visiting Handmade Create and the Happen store. They were super friendly, looked after me while I was melting from the Sydney heat, and just knowledgeable, and it was great to have a chat with them. On Friday I went to Morris & Sons, which used to be my local yarn shop. They don't have a huge selection of indie dyed yarns or anything like that, but they have a lot of their own yarns and some of the bigger manufactured yarns. They had a fantastic display of Regia sock yarns where all the socks had been knit up with the different colourways and put on sock blockers, and that looked beautiful, but they didn't have the colourway that I was after in the Arnie and Carlos Regia yarns, so I didn't buy any yarn, but I asked about the 1.5mm needles, and that's where I got my Karbonz from. They also had some KnitPro Novas in the 2mm, but I tried sort of holding them and they just felt a little bit heavy, so I decided to pass up on those, but I'm really happy with my Karbonz. I think they're going to hold up very well, and I don't have that fear that they're going to end up snapping on me or anything like that, so very happy to have picked those up. Then on Saturday I caught up with a wonderful friend who took me to Speights Sisters, and that was just completely mind-blowing how amazing the Speights Sisters store is. Speights Sisters is the yarn shop that I always wished for in Sydney that didn't exist, and I think I would have been spending a lot of time there had it been there when I was living there. We spent about 2 hours in there, and I still didn't see everything that was there because I was sort of focused on particular yarns and sitting and knitting and chatting, and it was wonderful to meet a couple of the people at Speights Sisters, and they were incredibly friendly and just very welcoming, and it was wonderful to be able to spend some time there. The yarn fumes were very strong. I was very torn. I was looking at quite a few yarns, but because I'd told myself that I only needed needles in Sydney, I hadn't looked at particular patterns to figure out yardages and that kind of thing. So I did kind of talk myself, and I was talked out of buying some yarns because I was holding on to them for too long without being completely convinced that I should buy them because the quantities weren't enough. So I was trying to pair up and end up with stripes, and I mean, I wear a lot of stripes, but I really want some single colorway tops, I think, at the moment. And so I was reminded that when I go to Bendigo, there will be more yarns. So I think I made the right choice, but I did pick up some yarn. So the first of the yarns that I picked up was this one, and this is by Speights. It's the Vivacious DK, and it's in the silver and bronze colorway. It's a DK 8-ply yarn, and this is going to be a hat. I have absolutely no doubt about that, so it was allowed to come home with me because I know that it will be a hat. I don't know which hat yet. It's most likely going to be one of my own designs, but it just called me. I just think it's a wonderful colour. The next yarns that I picked up were these two. So these are by Revive Designs from New Zealand. So I believe this was the featured yarn for February. So Bioscan Sisters has a particular dye that they feature each month, and this was it for this month. This one, the greyish one, is called Bluestone, and the other one is called Takapo. They are superwash merino 80% and 20% nylon sock yarns, and they have a different feel to some of the sock yarns that I've seen. So I think these are going to make a beautiful shawl. So I seem to be sort of gravitating towards these sort of light and then darkish. I don't know what you'd call this colour. It's sort of a bluish greenish. It reminds me of some kind of gem kind of colour, but that's going to be a shawl, and I think that this is going to block out really, really well just due to the way that the yarn sort of looks. Yep, definitely special. So my last yarn purchase was from Renan Ollie. This is in the Wildflower colourway in the 85% superwash merino, 15% nylon, and this one doesn't have a strict sort of plan for it yet, but I just couldn't resist a bit of Renan Ollie addition to my stash because I love Renan Ollie yarns. Absolutely, just look at those colours. Just gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. So they were my yarns, and then I was on the hunt for needles, so I had to pick up some needles, and they kindly had a look and found me some 3mm HiyaHiya interchangeable tips. I don't think these are the sharps, but I'm pretty sure they're not, but I'm not fussed at all. The main thing was that I just really wanted some 3mm tips because the interchangeable set that I have doesn't have 3mm tips because it's not a standard US size. So I've been needing these on a couple of projects where I've had to either go down or up a needle size because I haven't had them. So I'm really happy that I finally got them, and I think they had one other set. I also picked up some twist. So these are Chiagoo twist red lace interchangeables. I picked up the cable and some tips so that I can try them out. I want to know how they feel to knit with. I got this particular set because I can use it for hats, but if I'm happy then I will buy myself a set at some point. So looking forward to trying those. And then I also picked up some Chiagoo double points. These are the 2mm size, and it was just so that I would have a 15cm set of 2mm, because the 2mm set that I have at the moment is 20cm. So if you're doing little toys, 20cm or 8 inches is just way too long. So the 6-inch or 15cm is much more usable. I also picked up a little bottle of soak. This is in the Celebration colorway, Celebration scent, and I'm looking forward to trying that out and seeing how that goes. I haven't used soak before. I think I've got one little sample that somebody sent me, but I've been lovingly holding on to it because it was the only one I had. So I'm looking forward to giving this a try, and I'll try the one that I have in my stash, if you can call it that, when it's about washing liquids, but that will be fun to try. So yes, I definitely recommend popping by Bioscan Sisters if you're ever in Sydney. Take some lunch, because you will get hungry as you wander around and look at all the amazing yarns, and enjoy it. They have a sale going on, I think it starts today, online and in their shop, so even if you're not in Sydney, you could check out the sale online if you're in the mood for some yarn. They had amazing Brooklyn tweed loft, a huge wall of it, and that took a lot of my time, just staring at the amazing colours that they had and imagining what I could do with it. So I think there will be some Brooklyn tweed loft in my future at some point, but I also have quite a bit of yarn already sort of piled up, ready to use. And one of my yarn goals this year was to try 3 new to me indie dyes. So I've now got the yarn, but I just need to get on to trying them out. So that will be one of the things that I try to focus on in the near future. So for other blathery sort of stuff about Sydney and home life, I guess, the journey to Sydney took about 5 hours on a coach and a train, and it was incredibly hot and humid in Sydney. I've lived there for a huge chunk of my life, and I just don't remember it ever feeling quite like that. I think I've gotten acclimatized to the drier heat out here, because it wasn't particularly warm, it was just humid, and my Finnish body couldn't cope with it, so it was bizarre. I've definitely not reacted that way to Sydney before, so I used to be able to tolerate the heat, but oh well. So I went through the yarn shops, but I also went to some of my favourite shops to look at bits and pieces. So I went to Kinokuniya, which is one of my favourite bookshops, and I picked up this Learn in 15 Minutes Calligraphy. And this just has some different styles of lettering. I'm just getting a little bit obsessed with lettering at the moment with my bullet journal. It still hasn't sort of flourished in any particular way, but I'm spending a bit of time just practicing lettering and playing around. So I also ended up buying a bunch of brush pens in various shops that I went past. Some of these were sort of super cheapies from Daiso, and then I bought some from Kinokuniya, I bought some from Muji, and a few art supply shops. But I just wanted to get a few different ones to see how they work, try them out, and just play. I'm finding it very relaxing to sort of sit and use the brush pens and do swirls and all that kind of stuff. So that was fun. I also went to the Museum of Contemporary Art and just had a bit of a wander around. It has one of my favourite lifts in Sydney, because you can go up in the lift and just sort of look out at Circular Quay. But the art exhibitions, I just sort of wandered through. There wasn't anything in particular that I wanted to see, but it was nice to go in there and have a poke around. I also went to Bondi because I needed to see the ocean. It had been a long time since I've seen the ocean, and lots of people were about. I went and poked my toes into the water, and that was beautiful. And I wish I had my swimmers with me. I definitely could have done with a swim, considering how hot it was, but at least my feet got wet and I got to feel the sand between my toes, so that was good. I also took a ferry ride from Darling Harbour over to Circular Quay, which is just one of those fun things to do. I had been wanting to go over to Manly, but I just didn't have the time, so the ferry from Darling Harbour to Circular Quay at least. It provides a bit of a view of the city and also makes a trip underneath the harbour bridge, so it's just fun to, I don't know, I'm such a tourist in Sydney, even though I've lived there for so long, but I love those little things that you can see and do that just make you marvel at life and what people have created and all that kind of stuff. On Sunday when I headed back, I stopped by Kitumba, where I went to the Three Sisters rock formation, had a bit of a look at that. There was lots and lots of tourists because I don't think I've been on a Sunday before, and it was jam-packed. I think if you're going to go, if you're ever in sort of on holiday in around Sydney and want to go to the Blue Mountains, going midweek is definitely a lot easier to get around than on a Sunday, but it was nice to see. Still got a chance to take a selfie with the Three Sisters, and I did a bit of a bushwalk, or it's not really a bushwalk because it's a trail that they've put in place, and it's about, I think, 45 minutes to go along. I had that urge that I was there, I might as well do it. I had time to kill, so the home trip ended up taking 12 hours because I'd left Sydney early to stop off in Kitumba and what have you, but it was a good way to break up the journey, I think. So I enjoyed that. But all up my Sydney travels, I ended up walking 55 kilometres over 3 days, which was a little bit wild, more than I intended, but I was relishing the fact that I had places to walk and things to see and do, and it was a lot of fun. Gardening wise, my garden has been sort of going through that end of summer phase, I think. I managed to do some pickling of pumpkin, and I got some great suggestions for freezing pumpkin, which I haven't tried yet. I've just sort of been letting my pumpkins sit in a dark cupboard for a little while and just sort of seeing what happens to them there, but I will try freezing some pumpkins. I was also suggested to plant some eggplants, so I'll put that on my gardening list for whenever eggplant sowing season happens, but I'm guessing it's later in the year. I have to start thinking about what I'm going to plant for autumn and winter. The temperatures here are a little bit extreme, so the frost is something that last year I didn't really bother to do much in the garden during winter, but I'm going to try to make it an all seasons garden, and we'll see how that goes. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening to me ramble on. I am definitely going to go to Bendigo after the fun that I had in Sydney. I can't but go to Bendigo and have more of that fun of being surrounded by people who knit and crochet and use yarn in all sorts of ways, and it's something that I miss a lot by living where I do, but it's something that I know that I can at least go and chase up when I need to. So I will be organising all my Bendigo stuff very, very soon, and that will be an adventure that I'm sure I'm not going to forget. I will try to podcast early in March as we kick off for the spin along, but otherwise I will see you in the Ravelry group and on Instagram and all that jazz. So thanks again, and I'll see you soon.